There's a voice deep inside every dad calling him to lead. Society, vices, inner demons, negative thoughts try to dampen and drown out that voice, but it never goes away. Your wife feels it, your children feel it, and your heart and soul feel it too. It's the voice that starts off as a whisper, but then becomes a calling to be the tip of the spear for your family, a calling to play all out and lead by example for your children, a calling to build a legacy that will go on for generations, a calling to be the warrior dad you were born to be. Dads, our children need us now more than ever to be that beacon of hope, courage, positivity, and strength. It's time to rise as warrior dads together as a brotherhood. If you felt that twinge in your soul, it's time for the Warrior Dad Experience. Welcome to the show. I am extremely excited to have special guest, my running buddy, Brian Aikens on the show. Brian, welcome.
Hey, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm really, really grateful to be here and grateful to have some time to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So mindfulness for dads, for kids. Would love first to kind of you level set the audience as far as your background, kind of your experience. I think that's always good to give some context there.
Yeah. So for me, I've been teaching for 20 years now, and I've been working with kids who have emotional needs, behavioral needs, and teaching them emotional regulation, teaching them how to understand how their brain works and why it does the things that it does and how to control those feelings that they're having. So I've been doing that for 20 years now. I've have my bachelor's degree in education, but then I went back to school for my master's degree in clinical and counseling psychology. So I'm a trained psychotherapist. And I got into that because of the kids that I was working with all the time. And that led to positive psychology, and then led down this path of mindfulness and mindfulness for myself, and then mindfulness, teaching that out to my students. And then I also teach graduate school through Newman University. I teach classes there on mindfulness. I teach classes on the brain. And so that's another good avenue for me to explore with fellow teachers and trying to share some of these practices with them.
Love it. So mindfulness might be a kind of a different, unique topic that dads are like, okay, what the heck is mindfulness? Can you define it and kind of give us a definition of what mindfulness is in your eyes?
Yeah, mindfulness is not that big, scary word that most people think it is. I mean, there's a couple of parts that I'll break it down into, but I want to kind of talk about what it isn't. So it's not this ability to clear your mind. You don't have a superpower. Our minds aren't meant to not think, right? Our minds are meant to think really well. And, mindfulness is this idea that it actually can create clearer thinking for you. Even though you and I both support the haircut really well and we're bald, it's not a bald guy sitting in lotus position on top of the mountain. Even though I love to get into the woods and climb up into the mountains, that's not what it's all about. It's not, I hear from people, I don't have time to do this mindfulness practice. And what I found, it actually provides more time because you are creating more awareness throughout your day, and you're able to, find that time in your day. So let's break it down. I got two parts that I think are really important. If you know who Dan Harris is, he is a news anchor on ABC News, nightly news. And he wrote a book called 10% Happier. And I love his definition because I think it's really a modern definition of what mindfulness is. So he says that mindfulness is a skill where you learn to see what's happening in your head right now clearly, so you don't get yanked around by it. And I just love that word, yanked around by, because how many times do we get yanked around by things? If it's something that's going on with work, something with our kids, something that's in our friendships, or there's just something that's not going the way that we want it to go in our life, and we get yanked around by it. it gets it up into our head. So, Dan Harris's definition talks about this skill that we can develop to understand what's going on in our head right now, and to be able to see it more clearly, so then we don't get yanked around by it. So that's like an emotional awareness piece, right? So being able to be emotionally aware of how we're feeling. I like to think of mindfulness as this ability to remember or to be more aware. And if we can be more aware, we can control things a little bit more. The other piece of mindfulness I think is really important is that mindfulness, I think some people think mindfulness as this thing that I do, and I set some time aside in the morning, and I practice being mindful, so being aware, and then I come back to it the next day. But for me, it's way more important that mindful awareness can be something that you do throughout your entire day. So noticing little micro moments that bring you peace and joy and a more stress-free life, things that bring you awe, so just noticing those little micro moments for me is what being mindful really is about.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. A couple things that stood out in my mind was, number one, not the ability to shut off the mind or quiet the mind. I feel like that is, everybody thinks that that's the way it should be done, either from a mindfulness or a meditation perspective, and it just doesn't happen. That was number one. Number two, it's a skill, right? So if you're starting this, and I know we're going to talk about this here in the near future, if you're starting out, anytime you start out anything, here's a newsflash: you're going to suck when it first starts, but it's a skill 100%. That you can build up. And then the other piece, and this is like exercise. So many dads specifically are exercising in the morning, but then they sit for 8-9 hours a day. No, you got to exercise. You got to move the body. Here's you mentioned it, Brian, where, hey, if you practice mindfulness in the morning or meditation, something of that, hey, make sure you're embracing that and doing it throughout your day. So those were, I think, 3 key points that you touched on. You mentioned emotional awareness. What does that term kind of mean to you in what you do?
Well, so for me personally, as a father, as a husband, just as a human being in general, right? Just being more aware of what's going on inside my head, how I'm feeling, what emotions am I feeling at this moment. Oftentimes, I don't know how you were raised, but my father, my grandfather, we didn't touch emotions, right? We were men, and we just sucked it up, and we figured it out, and we didn't have emotions. We didn't cry. That wasn't part of the process. I took a different path though from those two. I saw that path of having no emotion or pretending there was no emotion going on, and I jumped into the emotions, and I feel them. So I'd like to think that I'm a pretty emotional guy, emotionally connected to who I am. And so that emotional awareness piece is that ability to know how I feel, to understand what's going on inside of my head, and being able to manage that. So as a father, I got yelled at quite a bit when I was a young boy. It didn't feel good. I know that. And I made this pledge to myself that I was never going to be a dad like that. And, listen, I'm not perfect. I've definitely yelled at my kids. I've made mistakes, and, I work on it every single day. But emotional awareness is taking that moment of stress or that moment of increased anxiety or frustration, noticing that you're having those feelings, those emotions going on inside your head, and then being able to do something that's more productive instead of lashing out or yelling or getting frustrated. Being able to calm yourself down in a manner that allows you to process those feelings that you're feeling, and then have some type of outcome that's going to be more favorable, right? So not yelling, and I can calm myself down and talk to my kids about what I was upset with that they just did, or talk to my wife about what she said that upset me, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think I was brought up very similarly, where I didn't express emotions a lot. I know in my relationship, it's a challenge for me to do that sometimes. So it's a skill I need to practice. I forget where I heard this recently, but especially for men, any frustration boils out as anger. So like if we're frustrated with our kids, many times we snap to anger. So we've got to build that muscle to choose a different route and go a different way from that perspective. So if dad's listening, hey, all right, this sounds good, Brian. This sounds great, Jeff. But like, how do I start to practice building that skill? How do I incorporate it into my day? What do you do, Brian, to share? What are some actions that dads can put into place to start to, one, tap into that emotional awareness, but build that mindfulness muscle that they need in the day-to-day that they operate in?
Yeah, listen, if I can say one thing to dads out there, it's don't wait until you feel like you need to get into this practice or define this emotional awareness.
Okay.
So for me, I was going through graduate school. I was working full time as a teacher, and I also had a small fitness company that I was running. So I was doing this all in one day, and I was working pretty much 4:30 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And I was just overstressed. And I found mindfulness out of desperation. And so
Okay.
I would strongly urge dads, don't wait to that moment of desperation. Because for me, it was a rock bottom. And I knew I needed to find something that was going to help pull me out of it. And thankfully, I came across this practice, and that's what did help pull me out of it. So the biggest thing, and you mentioned this plenty of times before, it's about discipline, right? If you really want to change something in your life or increase something, to be better at something, you have to have discipline to create a strong, healthy habit. And so it starts with that. It starts with, why am I doing this? How and how am I going to make these small steps to get it started? So first suggestion is just start small, right? Start small, 5 minutes a day at a regular time in the morning. I know you have a morning routine. I have a morning routine. And part of that routine, spend 5 minutes just breathing. One of the greatest pieces of advice I got was from a monk up in New York State. I was talking with him about meditation, and I was telling him how I use apps to help me with my meditation practice, with guided meditation, and that's fine, and it works, and I still use apps every now and again. But he said one really simple practice to start developing more mindfulness, more awareness, is just count your breathing. So breathing in, 1, breathing out, 2, breathing in, 3, breathing out, 4. Start at 10 and get all the way up to 10, and then start counting back down again. And just doing that, a couple of times, 5 minutes a day, just to get started. Really, if you're going to start building awareness, it's just awareness of breath, finding that breath and just being able to count those breaths, and doing it at a regular time makes it a consistent practice. So it's just like I get up and drink water every single day when I get up, and then brush my teeth, and I have this routine. Adding that 5 minutes of meditation in, or mindfulness practice in, is just a short little bit of added time. And I should say too, there is a difference between mindfulness and meditation.
Okay.
They're not one in the same, but they are really similar. So mindfulness is this practice of being aware, and meditation is the actual practice of that. So mindfulness is being aware of my breath. Meditation is the action of actually doing that, of being aware of your breath. So for me, it's just starting small, adding a simple habit, getting up 10 minutes earlier so you can add something in where you're just focusing on your breath. If that doesn't work for you, then there are a lot of apps out there that you can jump into and try. Insight Timer is my go-to app that I've been using for probably 12, 13 years now. Calm is another app. There's a lot of apps out there that you can certainly use. But like I said earlier, mindfulness isn't just, hey, I'm going to do this thing in the morning and then it's done for the day. It's about a practice that lasts all day long. So I forget who does this, but it's a quote of "bring the joy." So and he said every time he would walk through a door frame, That's when that was his cue to bring the joy.
Okay.
Right. And so it's kind of the same idea. Have cues around you that can be that reminder for you to take a couple of breaths. So one practice that I bring into my classroom every day is I have a bell that goes off every 30 minutes, and that bell rings. And no matter what we're doing, we pause, we take 3 long, slow in breaths and out breaths, and then we go about our day again.
Okay.
So throughout your day, maybe it's when you walk through that doorway, or maybe you put sticky notes, like one in your car, one at your desk in your office, one by your nightstand, or whatever it might be. And whenever you see that sticky note, and maybe it just says breathe, right? That's your cue to just take 3 long, slow in breaths or out breaths. You could do it when you are at a red light. You could take 3 breaths when you get a notification on your phone. I know you and I have our notifications turned off and we don't get it. And I highly recommend everybody turn their notifications off, but maybe you still do have your notifications on. Every time you get a notification, take 3 breaths before you respond back to that. So having some type of cue can also be really helpful to start to implement that practice a little bit more. And then the other piece that I think is really important is that a mindful awareness throughout the day. So just noticing things. And I think this is something that occurs once you develop a practice of being more mindful. You start to notice those seemingly little meaningless moments throughout your day. You notice them a whole lot more. For example, before I came in here to talk with you, I was outside playing baseball with my son, and just the laughter that he and I were having was just a great experience. It made me feel good. It was kind of one of those awe moments for me. Like, man, I'm glad that we're spending this time together, just having a little laugh, playing some baseball. And you know what I do, Jeff? And I think this is really great, is I document those things. So nice. I've shared this with you. I shared this with you before, but I have a little cards, a 3x5 card. You can use any note card. This company is called 3x5 Life. It's a gratitude card and it's a win card. And I turn that win column into +1s. What are my +1s throughout the day? Well, how am I growing each day? So later on, after this call, I'm going to write down on there playing baseball with my son and just having some laughter. And I go back to these cards every Sunday, and I review my week, and then it highlights all those little things that were, those little moments throughout my week again. It highlights them again. So that brings back that joy one more time with me. So little things like that, I think, are really important. Oftentimes, no matter what it is, exercise or trying to be better at our job or whatever it might be, we think we got to just jump all in and do it and do it the best that we can. Well, you know how that works. You go into the gym and you start hitting the weights really heavy. Well, you can't even move your arm the next day because you're so sore, right? It's the same thing with a mindful practice. You got to start small. You got to create a small habit. And I think you said this all the time, right? Make it almost laughable. So it's like you're not even really doing anything. A couple minutes, a couple breaths a day, a couple moments throughout your day where you're taking 3 deep breaths. That's an awareness practice. And eventually that gets us stronger as a habit in your mind. And then it starts to build on top of it. And you can make it bigger and you make it longer. So, for example, my meditation practice now is anywhere between, a minute and 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes sometimes. Okay. But it's not the same every single day. And I certainly didn't start meditating 30 minutes a day when I first started. So it's just starting small, I think, is a really, really important piece to that.
Yeah, no, I love that. A couple things I wrote down as you were going through it. Number one, like a why to do this. I would say, hey, being a better dad, being the best dad you can be. And we can all be better. Everybody has room for growth. So when you think about that, especially if you're a little bit quick to fly off the handle with the kiddos and then you regret it later, that's your why, right? Of being able to build that muscle. Love the counting your breaths. And this is just a ninja move, right? Like you count, you can't focus on anything else but counting the numbers. So immediately it quiets your minds. I thought about dads that are in corporate America and they're meeting after meeting after meeting. Hey, great cue is before you go into that next meeting, take 3 breaths. in and out, right?
Bam.
And center yourself. So that was another one. And then lastly, I hear a lot of dads just want to be more present with their kids, want to be more present with their
Yeah.
families. You mentioned, hey, when you start flexing this muscle, all of a sudden the presence you're going to have, being in the moment, having that moment almost move you to tears or just joyous laughter.
Yep.
You're going to have those show up so much more because you're practicing it and you're aware of it rather than being tethered to the phone or worrying about an email that you got to send for work. No, this is a path Brian's giving you to being more present, more intentional with your families day in and day out. And that's so important to do. So that being said, all right, dad starts practicing it. What if they have, a kiddo who's kind of going sideways and that dad would like their son or daughter to start practicing? What is there anything in your experience working with kids that are great avenues or actions that dads can guide their kiddos to take it up?
Yeah, listen, Jeff, everything that I mentioned for yourself to do, you can easily do that with your kids too, right? There's nothing wrong with having a gratitude practice with your son or your daughter. Doesn't matter if they're 5 or if they're 15, right? Doing those things that you are already doing yourself is easy to bring it over to do it with your children. One thing that I have found as being a dad is that I have even tonight, again, going out to that baseball example I was using earlier, I knew we had this interview coming up. I knew that I was getting messages from you. I was getting messages from other friends, and I could have easily pulled my phone out of my pocket and started looking at it and replying to messages while I was playing baseball with my son. But I had that awareness that, hey, this stuff is going on. It's going on my phone, and I have people I could talk to or things I need to get prepared for. But because I have practiced that awareness, it was a moment that said to me, no, my focus, my presence needs to be what's happening right now in this moment. And so that's just one way that practice can help change the way your interactions are with your kids. I remember when my son was younger, and when he was a toddler, he'd get upset. And here's the reality: when kids are little, they have behaviors that are expressing how they're feeling because they don't know how to say, hey, Dad, I'm feeling really upset right now because I really wanted to play with this toy and you told me I had to go to bed. They don't have that skill. So what do? They whine, they throw things because they're expressing that emotion that they're feeling. They don't know how to talk about it. Now, me as a dad, I can respond to that and get upset and yell back and throw things. And how that's going to go. We're not going to get anywhere with that. And so this practice has allowed me to step back and say, hey, bud, I know you really want to be able to play right now, but it's bedtime and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We need to make sure that we get proper sleep or whatever your reason might be. And I can actually have that conversation instead of responding in a way that is going to make the situation even worse. And so how do I bring this to my family? How do I share this with my kids? How do I share this with my wife? I have been practicing meditation now since 2012. And so when I first started practicing meditation, I wanted to share this with everybody. It was making sense to me. It was helping me be more aware. It was helping me be more calm. It was helping me be more present. And so I said to my wife, honey, you got to do this with me. And instant response was, I can't clear my mind. Mm-hmm. Right? Typical type of response. I certainly understand. And I kept on putting the pressure on me, like, you should do this, you should do this. And I kept getting more pushback and more pushback. And I came across this quote from my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, and I found it to be kind of life-changing of how I interacted with my family about this idea of mindfulness. And the quote is, we don't need to preach. By practicing, the changes in ourselves will start to manifest and others will notice and inquire. Okay. And so when I first started practicing meditation, I was pushing it on other people, but they weren't interested. They weren't where I was at. right? I was trying to get them to be where I was at instead of meeting them where they were at. And so I just started practicing. I started practicing more openly. I started leaving the door open when I started practicing meditation. I started to share with them what I was being more mindful of or how I was doing it. And by me modeling that, they started to inquire more. So my son would come up and sit and meditate with me in the bed, or he would sit. I have a meditation garden in the backyard. He would come up and sit with me sometimes, and not long, right? 30 seconds. And he's like, okay, I got to go.
Right.
But he would just come and sit with me. So just modeling it was the game changer for me. And my family, how I was more calm. They started to see what I was doing. And then we just started having conversations, and it took a long time. It really did. It took a long time, but I think we're always still growing in the practices that we're doing. But just I think the first thing you can do is model it. And so there's an author out there. Her name is Dr. Kristen Race, and she's got a book called Mindful Parenting. And she gives some tips, and so I'm going to share some of these ideas to create this mindful family practice. But then I also want to give out some practical things you can actually do. So the first thing she says is create space. So create space not only physically, but create space in a way that gives you a chance to respond. So, Viktor Frankl has a great quote out there, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is power to choose our response. And our response lies growth and our freedom. And so that space, right, creating that type of space where we have a chance to respond to our kids, I think is really important. But create physical space. So we kind of all have this in our house. I have my meditation garden, like I mentioned, outside. That's my physical space for me. In the wintertime, I have a chair by the window that I use more often for my meditation practice, my mindful practice. My son has a peaceful spot in his bedroom. So we use pillows, or we have books. We have like some fidgets, or we have some calm down tools that he can use. That are in that space in his room. So he's got a physical space. My wife has a chair by the back door that she likes to sit in the morning and have her coffee, and that's her physical space. So create a physical space is the first thing that you can do. And so when I said earlier, hey, start small, start with 5 minutes a day and do it regularly. Now you all also have a space. So when you go to that space, you already know what it's for. So create a space. Not only that, but with creating space, but creating something physical. So we have mindful jars or calming jars. You could Google it and you're going to find a bunch of different recipes for it, but it's nothing more than glitter glue and water. And that's pretty much about it. And it's just a calming jar. And that's something that my son uses. We practice using it regularly. That way, when he has those moments, he can come back to it. And then another way to create space is at bedtime. So there's a great book out there called Sweet Dreams by Miriam Gates. It's mindful practices to read to kids at night, and they can do these different breathing practices as they're getting settled for bed. The other idea that Kristen Race talks about is just creating or increasing awareness. So, like we talked about just a little bit ago, being more present, limiting those distractions. I say being present and aware as a parent means I'm more intentional in my actions. And so just like today, playing baseball, I was more intentional being with him and having that time with him. And here's a really great practice that I just introduced to my son. And I kind of got the idea from you, actually, through conversations that you and I were having. I was trying to get my son to meditate, but meditate or mindful is such a big word to people, especially kids and even to dads out there. It's a big word. So I said to him, hey, bud, why don't we just breathe and take a mindful minute? Let's just breathe together and take a mindful minute. And so I literally set a timer on my watch, and we just breathe for 1 minute. And he counts his breath, and he counts his breaths, and he might get 10, he might get 15 breaths. And I said to him this morning, actually, I said, hey, bud, we haven't done a mindful minute in a little while. Do you want to do one with me? He said, Daddy, I do them every day. I've been doing them without you.
Nice. Love it.
I said, you have not. Like, really? He said, yeah.
Awesome.
I said, I did it this morning before I read my book. And so right there, like it was just an idea a couple of weeks ago that we started doing this, and maybe a couple months ago, I guess. But then he started taking it on his own when I wasn't doing it with him.
That's awesome.
Another great idea to increase awareness, and this is something my daughter and I did when she was younger. She's now 19, but when she was younger, we went stargazing.
Okay.
So think about that, just increasing awareness. We went stargazing. We would lay in the backyard and we would just look up at the stars. And we were increasing awareness by the views that we had around us, the space that we had around us, the time that we had together. And now we have a special star that we call that's our star. And so every time that we see that star, it's a memory that her and I still have, and we can share with one another. Sometimes I'll snap a picture of the star and I'll send it to her and just say, just thinking about you. So just kind of increasing that awareness.
Yeah, no, I love those, man. Those are fantastic. Couple things that I heard was, one, we got to practice ourselves first, lead from the front as dads, and then everybody will see the change in us, and then they'll jump on board rather than trying to force it, and then sharing the journey and figuring out, especially when it comes to kids. I love that you used, do you want to breathe? That's how I got my boys into meditation, was, guys, you open and breathe with me. And I think when we make it basic, something we already do like that, they can put their head around it and say, hey, I breathe anyway. Sure. I'm willing to do it. So I love those pieces. Brian, where can people find more information about you? Where can they find you as we wrap up?
On social, you can find me at insight_minds, and same, the website is insightminds.com. I'm sharing things that I'm doing in the classroom, sharing things about mindfulness and meditation, and sharing my running journey with you, and all the fun things that we're doing together too.
Awesome. Brian, thanks so much for being on the show.
Jeff, I appreciate it. Grateful for you. Thanks so much.
You got it. Dare to be uncommon, love, lead, legacy, create a legendary day, and I'll talk to you soon.